Ever get that feeling where you really want to dive deep into something complex, really understand it, but looking at a giant stack of reading material just feels overwhelming?
Yeah, totally.
That's where we come in. This time we're going deep, way deep into the work of Émile Durkheim, a true pioneer in how we think about society.
We've got a ton of his original writings to work with, his thoughts on the organization of society and the division of labor in society, his groundbreaking exploration of suicide. We also have his methodological framework from the Rules of Sociological Method and his examination of belief systems in the elementary forms of religious life, plus some fascinating commentary on his work and its impact.
So what we're aiming for is to unpack all this complexity, pull out the most important insights, and understand why his ideas are still so relevant today.
Yeah.
We want to give you a clear view of his take on society and how it influences our individual lives.
Right.
And hopefully we'll uncover some surprising connections along the way. So if you're interested in the hidden forces shaping our world and how societies actually work, this is definitely the place to be.
Let's dive right in.
Let's do it.
Durkheim is widely considered one of the founders of modern sociology, standing alongside figures like Comte, Marx, and Weber.
Right, and Auguste Comte was a major influence, correct? With that whole positivism thing, applying the scientific method to understand society.
Exactly. Durkheim was a strong advocate for Comte's positivist approach, but he went beyond Comte. He really worked to establish sociology as its own distinct and rigorous academic discipline, separate from philosophy. He wasn't content with just abstract theories. He wanted a concrete, systematic way to actually study society scientifically.
So that leads us to the Rules of Sociological Method, which he published in 1895. This is like his blueprint, right? His guide to making sociology a true science.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is where he lays out his methodology, a step-by-step approach to investigating social phenomena.
Yeah.
And that same year, he establishes the first ever University Department of Sociology in Bordeaux. That solidified sociology's place in the academic world.
So at the core of this new scientific approach, what was Durkheim urging sociologists to focus on? What were those things he thought we should be studying?
The cornerstone of his methodology was the concept of social facts.
The social facts.
Absolutely central to understanding his perspective.
Okay.
He defined them as ways of acting, thinking, and feeling that exist outside of any one individual. And crucially, they have this power to compel or influence our behavior.
Compelling power. That sounds pretty strong. Can you give us a concrete example of what he meant by that?
Think about something as basic as the language you speak. You didn't invent it. It existed before you, and it dictates how you communicate. It even shapes how you think. There's no law that forces you to speak English. But try navigating life in an English-speaking society without it, and you'll quickly see its power,
Yeah.
Or take economic systems. Durkheim pointed out that a business owner is technically free to disregard things like modern accounting practices, but doing so would almost certainly lead to failure in a competitive market.
Right.
The pressure of the system forces certain ways of operating. So the point is, society isn't just a bunch of individuals making free choices. These social facts are pushing and pulling us, often without us realizing it.
Okay, I see what you mean. So it's not just personal preferences, it's these external forces that are shaping what we do and think. And this really challenged the intellectual climate at the time, especially the whole German idealism thing, the idea that our minds are the primary creators of reality.
Yeah.
Durkheim's kind of pushing back against that, isn't he?
Precisely. Durkheim flips that script, arguing that these external social forces are actually the primary drivers shaping our experience as individuals. And the positivist approach involves identifying these social facts, uncovering those unwritten rules, and studying what happens when those rules are broken.
Okay, so when we go against a social norm, there are consequences. And by studying those, we can understand the moral code of a society.
Exactly. That's why Durkheim famously called sociology a science of ethics, because it's fundamentally about understanding the moral fabric of society.
Now, I remember you mentioned that Durkheim was pretty fond of using metaphors to explain his ideas.
Oh, absolutely.
He used one from chemistry, right?
Yeah.
How did that help illustrate his view of society?
He argued that when individuals come together, something new emerges, kind of like combining elements in chemistry. You create a compound with properties that are different from the individual elements. Society, for him, was more than just the sum of its parts. It has unique characteristics and dynamics that can't be understood just by studying individuals in isolation.
Yeah.
So he's saying that society isn't just out there, it's actually shaping our brains, giving us the very tools we use to understand the world.
That's a very interesting way to put it. It's like baking a cake, you have separate ingredients, but when you mix and bake them, you end up with something totally new.
Exactly. He also used a medical analogy. He viewed societies as being in a state of health or moral illness.
Interesting.
The sociologist then becomes like a doctor, diagnosing social problems by analyzing these social facts and how individuals relate to them.
So the prescription would then be to find social remedies for these problems to either maintain or restore social well-being. I like how he's trying to bring this level of scientific rigor to understanding something as complex as society. Now, you mentioned earlier that Durkheim's own path wasn't straightforward.
Right.
He was initially on a completely different trajectory, right?
Yeah, born into a long line of rabbis in the Lorraine region of France, Durkheim was actually set to become a rabbi himself.
Oh, wow.
He even started studying at a rabbinical school.
Okay.
But then he declared himself agnostic and left that path.
Okay, so that's a pretty major shift. Did this early experience with religion influence his later work, even though he personally moved away from it?
Absolutely. Even though he rejected religious dogma, Durkheim recognized religion as a powerful social fact. He spent a significant portion of his academic life studying religion and its role in society. And this culminated in his book, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life.
Right. And his journey to major academic achievements wasn't easy, was it?
No.
I read that he had some trouble getting into the École Normale Supérieure.
Yeah, it took him 3 attempts to get accepted into this prestigious institution.
Wow.
But when he finally did in 1879, he found himself among a remarkable group of individuals, including the philosopher Henri Bergson and Jean Jaurès, who later became a prominent socialist figure. But despite this, Durkheim actually finished near the bottom of his class.
Oh, interesting. So no immediate professorship waiting for him then?
No.
Yeah.
He had to take a more indirect route, teaching in secondary schools for a few years.
Okay.
But he eventually went back to his academic pursuits. He spent some time in Germany where he became a big fan of empirical research, drawing conclusions from observations and data. This experience heavily shaped his doctoral thesis, which turned into his first big published work, The Division of Labor in Society, in 1893.
The Division of Labor in Society. The title itself already hints at a central theme in his work.
Yes.
What was the main point he was making in that book?
In that book, Durkheim analyzed the huge transformation from traditional agrarian societies to modern industrialized ones. His focus was on how work was organized, how the division of labor evolved.
Yeah.
He argued this wasn't just a change in how tasks were done, but a fundamental shift in the structure of society.
Okay.
In how we connect with each other, in our shared values, even in our legal systems.
So as societies become more complex and specialized in their work, the way we relate to each other and find a sense of belonging also changes dramatically.
Exactly. He compared his perspective with Karl Marx's view on the division of labor.
Okay.
Marx argued that it led to alienation, the dehumanization of workers.
All right.
While Durkheim acknowledged there could be issues, he had a different fundamental understanding. He saw the division of labor as a foundation for a new kind of social cohesion, which he called organic solidarity.
Organic solidarity.
It's like the organs in a living body where different parts are all interdependent.
Right. How is that different from the togetherness you find in more traditional societies?
In traditional societies, what Durkheim called mechanical solidarity. People are connected through similarity, shared beliefs, values, life experiences. Think of a small, tight-knit community where everyone knows each other and lives in pretty much the same way.
Okay.
In organic solidarity, it's interdependence created by specialization that brings people together. We rely on others who have different skills, who do different jobs, to meet our needs.
So the more specialized our work and roles become, the more we need each other, even if we don't necessarily share the same beliefs or values. He also talked about social status in this context, right?
Yeah.
Relating it to the idea of merit.
Yes, in modern societies, he saw this division of labor leading to a social status based more on an individual's merit, their achievements and contributions, rather than things like birth or tradition.
Okay.
Of course, he knew this wasn't always the case in reality, but he saw this as the underlying principle associated with this type of society.
Right, and there's a moral dimension to this too, right? Like an expectation that we should fulfill our specific role in this web of interdependence.
Exactly. For Durkheim, the division of labor wasn't just an economic or organizational thing. It had this moral weight.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like an unspoken societal duty for people to contribute through their specialized work.
Okay.
He also made this interesting observation about how solidarity relates to individual personality.
Oh, how so? It would seem logical that as we become more specialized, more individualistic, our sense of connection to society might actually decrease.
He argued that in societies with a strong mechanical solidarity, where everyone is pretty similar, there's less room for individual personality to develop.
Mm-hmm.
Solidarity there is stronger the more alike people are. But as societies shift to organic solidarity, towards greater differentiation between individuals, while the basis of solidarity changes, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a decrease in social cohesion.
Right, so that's an important distinction. It's not that we become less connected, it's that the glue that holds us together changes. It shifts from shared similarity to mutual reliance.
Exactly.
Okay, now there's another really important concept he introduced, anomie.
Right.
This sounds like a key idea for understanding social problems.
Absolutely. Durkheim borrowed anomie from the philosopher Jean-Marie Gayau.
Okay.
It describes a state of normlessness, this feeling of uselessness, where individuals lack clear moral guidance, where there's no strong sense of belonging or purpose.
Okay.
Essentially, it's when the social norms that usually govern behavior break down.
Okay, and he saw this as a major factor in social problems, especially suicide, which he explored in his famous study, right?
Yes, in Suicide, published in 1897, Durkheim argued that anomie is a key social cause of suicide.
Okay.
When people are alienated, disconnected from society's norms, and when their aspirations are either blocked or unclear, it can lead to a state of despair and increase the risk of suicide. It's hard not to see parallels with how some people feel today,
Right.
in our fast-changing, uncertain world.
It does feel very relevant. So much social and economic upheaval.
Right.
Lots of people feeling uncertain, lacking direction.
Definitely. Anomie helps us understand that. Durkheim's main point was that suicide isn't just a personal psychological problem. It's a social phenomenon deeply rooted in the relationship between the individual and society.
And his approach to studying it was quite different, wasn't it? I mean, he focused on broad statistical patterns and social trends, right? Instead of individual cases or moral judgments.
Exactly. He took this descriptive approach, meticulously analyzing suicide rates across different groups, looking for correlations with social factors like marital status, religious affiliation, economic conditions. He deliberately steered clear of preaching or making moral judgments, which had been the norm when discussing suicide. While this was different from later phenomenological perspectives, it did have an influence on the development of things like existential and phenomenological psychiatry, which also focus on individual experiences within their social context.
Now let's talk about his work on religion. He argued that religion should be understood as a social fact as well. That's a pretty bold statement. What exactly did he mean by that?
In The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, published in 1912, Durkheim proposed that religion isn't primarily about the supernatural or personal beliefs in deities.
Okay.
He saw it as a fundamental social institution that fulfills certain social needs. He famously studied the practices of indigenous Australian tribes.
Okay.
He believed these elementary forms could reveal universal social functions common to all religions.
So his main interest wasn't in the specific doctrines of different religions, but in the social role they played,
Yeah.
regardless of their specific beliefs.
Precisely. He argued that religion, through its rituals and shared beliefs, strengthens social bonds, reinforces collective values, and gives individuals a sense of belonging and shared meaning.
Okay.
He saw religious practices as a way for societies to collectively affirm and reaffirm their shared identity and moral order.
Okay. And he linked the decline of traditional religious practices to an increase in anomie, right?
Yes, as societies industrialized and religious observance declined, the shared beliefs and rituals that used to connect people weakened, contributing to that sense of normlessness. He contrasted his sociological understanding of religion with Marx's critique, the whole opium of the people thing, the idea that religion was a distraction from real issues, like economic and political inequalities. But Durkheim also made this interesting point that even secular ideologies can function like religions in some ways.
How so?
He suggested that ideologies like, for example, Marxism, could provide a set of values, a belief system, even a historical narrative, and a sense of collective purpose.
Okay.
They could fulfill some of the same social functions that traditional religions used to.
Okay, let's go back to this idea of social facts and their power to influence us.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like Durkheim really emphasized how much our behavior is shaped by these external forces,
Definitely.
often without us even being aware of it.
Yeah, social facts, by their nature, develop outside of our individual consciousness, and they exert this influence on our actions and thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
As Durkheim wrote in the Rules of Sociological Method, to truly understand them as things, we don't need complex interpretations. Sociology actually has an advantage over psychology because while social facts may be intricate, they're more readily observable.
He gave some pretty clear examples, like social disapproval for not following conventions,
Right.
or the risk of failure for businesses that ignore modern practices.
Exactly. He stressed that social facts are not just individual quirks. They're widespread and exist independently of any one person's expression of them. The pressure to conform to norms is a societal phenomenon, not just a collection of individual preferences.
So how did Durkheim distinguish between what's considered normal and what's pathological in terms of these social facts? How do we know if something is a sign of a healthy or unhealthy society?
Durkheim had a specific way of looking at it.
Okay.
He considered a social fact to be normal if it was generally common for a given type of society at a particular stage of its development.
Okay.
So if you look at the average society of that type and it's prevalent, it's normal. If it's uncommon, then it's considered pathological.
So it's like a statistical definition then, based on how common something is.
Yeah.
But he also used that example of a society of saints, right? What was the point he was trying to make with that?
Society of saints was to illustrate that deviance is relative.
Okay.
Even in a society full of incredibly virtuous people where serious crimes wouldn't exist, even minor deviations from those high standards would still be considered wrong.
Okay.
They'd still be subject to some social sanction, even if it's just a raised eyebrow.
Mm-hmm.
The point is that the threshold for a transgression might be lower, but the social process of defining and dealing with deviance would still exist. This really shows that deviance is not something inherent in a specific act, but is defined by the social context.
It is a great example of how even small things can take on moral significance depending on the context. Now, what was Durkheim's take on the role of sociology when it came to social reform?
Okay.
Did he see it as a tool for actively changing society?
Durkheim believed sociology's primary role was to describe and interpret social organization, not to advocate for specific changes. He saw it as a science, and like other sciences, its main aim was to understand first. He made it clear that sociology, as he saw it, wouldn't be inherently individualistic or communist or socialist.
Right.
These ideologies were too focused on promoting reforms instead of objective analysis.
So the idea was to understand how society works, and then maybe that understanding could lead to action.
Yeah,
But sociology itself shouldn't be driven by a specific political agenda.
exactly.
Makes sense, especially for establishing it as a legitimate field of study. Now let's talk about one of his more mind-blowing ideas. The social origins of our fundamental ways of understanding the world.
Okay.
This seems pretty radical.
It is. In the elementary forms of religious life, Durkheim argued that even basic categories like time, space, classification, number, cause and effect, they don't come from individual minds,
Okay.
as thinkers like Kant suggested. Instead, they come from our collective social life.
Wait, so you're saying even something as basic as our understanding of time comes from society?
Yeah.
How does that work?
He said our concept of time is tied to the rhythms of social life, things like rituals, work patterns, social gatherings. These shared experiences create a framework for understanding and measuring time.
Okay.
Our understanding of space is initially linked to a society's territory and how they organize it.
So what about cause and effect?
He said that comes from our experience of collective power within a group. When a society works together to achieve something, it produces certain outcomes. That shared experience of collective action becomes the foundation for our understanding of causality.
Okay.
Even the way we classify things, group things into categories, reflects the social organization of a society.
Wow. And he connected language to this as well, right?
Absolutely. Language and the entire system of concepts within it is undeniably a product of collective development. It reflects how a society as a whole understands and represents its shared experiences.
Hmm.
The meanings of words often go beyond any single individual's experience. They carry the accumulated knowledge of a community.
It really is a mind-blowing idea that even the tools we use to think are shaped by our social environment.
It is.
It really highlights the profound impact society has on us as individuals. Now, you mentioned that he also emphasized social solidarity and shared beliefs, right?
Yes. He considered shared beliefs, whether religious, political, or moral, essential for shaping individual behavior and maintaining social order.
Okay.
Without some degree of unity based on shared values and regulated relationships, societies risk falling apart.
And he even suggested that society plays a role in moderating the struggle for existence. Correct?
Exactly. He said that wherever there are human societies, there's also altruism and cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
Social solidarity inherently tempers that survival of the fittest dynamic.
Right.
He went so far as to say that all societies are moral societies because they have rules and norms that guide behavior.
He also talked about a distinction between what he called spontaneous and forced division of labor.
Yes.
What was that about?
Durkheim argued that the division of labor can only truly create social solidarity when it's spontaneous. By spontaneous, he meant not just the absence of direct force, but also any indirect constraints or inequalities, things that might prevent individuals from developing their natural capacities.
So it's not enough for people to simply not be forced into specific roles.
Right.
There also needs to be a relatively level playing field where people have real opportunities to find their place based on their talents and what they're good at.
Yeah.
It's like spontaneous division of labor is when everyone naturally gravitates towards roles that suit them. But forced division of labor is when someone's stuck in a job they hate.
Yes.
Even though they might have other talents, they're trapped because they have no other options.
Precisely. He imagined an ideal situation where social inequalities reflect natural differences in ability, and there are no artificial barriers. That's when the division of labor can truly foster organic solidarity.
It's a powerful ideal, although it can be tough to achieve in reality.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at some critiques and interpretations of Durkheim's work. He's been so influential.
Yeah.
There are bound to be differing perspectives on his ideas.
Well, absolutely.
For instance, the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman had a pretty critical take. He suggested that Durkheim was trying to replace the authority of God and nature with the authority of society, particularly the nation-state.
Right.
So in this view, Durkheim's work could be seen as a justification for the state to enforce its own moral rules and demand obedience.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big statement.
Yeah.
What about Erich Fromm? He also had some interesting thoughts on Durkheim's idea of anomie, didn't he?
Yeah, Fromm saw anomie in modern societies as a lack of meaningful social structures
Okay.
beyond just the economic sphere. He argued that individuals in these societies can feel restless. They have this drive for self-development, but it's ultimately unsatisfying
Okay.
because there aren't any clear values or purpose to guide them. So they're always striving for some future happiness that never really comes.
So it's like this aimless striving without a sense of collective meaning.
Exactly.
Frompriza also highlighted Durkheim's observations about the state after the French Revolution.
Yeah, Frompriza pointed out that Durkheim saw the state as the main force for collective organization after the revolution had shaken things up,
Okay.
dismantling those traditional bonds. This left individuals more isolated,
Right.
potentially adrift. Durkheim described it as this disorganized dust of individuals.
It does paint a picture of a society where traditional communities are weakened and people become more reliant on the state for a sense of identity and regulation.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, let's contrast Durkheim's and Marx's views on alienation and the division of labor.
Durkheim believed that Marx's ideal of overcoming alienation, going back to a state of universal human capacities, just wasn't compatible with modern society. He thought complex societies needed specialization. He posed this question in the division of labor. Should we strive to be a complete self-sufficient individual or be an integral part of a larger, more complex whole? His conclusion was that organic solidarity, based on specialization, was the normal form of social cohesion for these societies, and the age of the universal man was over.
So Marx saw alienation as this fundamental problem of capitalism, something that needed to be overcome.
Right.
While Durkheim saw specialization as inevitable,
Mm-hmm.
even necessary.
Right.
But it required the right social and moral regulations to prevent the negative effects of anomie.
Exactly. They had very different diagnoses of the problems of industrial society and naturally proposed very different solutions.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the core of Émile Durkheim's thought.
Yeah.
We've covered so much, from his ideas of social facts and the different types of solidarity, to anomie, his views on religion, and the social origins of how we understand the world.
It's amazing how relevant his ideas still are today. He really gives us a framework for understanding the forces that shape our world.
Absolutely.
His work is incredibly helpful in analyzing all sorts of contemporary issues. Things like maintaining social cohesion in diverse societies, the persistence of inequality, the impact of technology, even the problem of deviance.
And for me, one of those aha moments was grasping his argument that even our most basic ways of thinking, our concepts of time and space and causality, are not innate, but are actually rooted in our social experiences.
Right.
It really makes you rethink the relationship between the individual and society.
It does. And we encourage you, the listener, to think about how these ideas can help you understand the world around you. Think about the social pressures you experience, the sources of solidarity in your communities, the ways that shared beliefs shape our lives. What we've discussed here just scratches the surface of Durkheim's work. There's so much more to explore in his writing.
So, here's something to think about. Durkheim believed social cohesion is key for a healthy society. So what do you see as the most significant forces at play today?
Yeah.
The ones strengthening or weakening that cohesion, especially in our increasingly complex and interconnected world? It's something worth pondering for sure.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel